The night air was thick and silent, the kind of quiet that only lived on the outskirts of the city, where street lamps were spaced too far apart and traffic was rare after sunset. A sleek black BMW rolled steadily down a lonely road, its engine humming low, its polished body gleaming under the moonlight. Behind the wheel sat a tall black man in a dark navy suit, his tie loosened just a bit, his face calm, eyes forward, posture straight. He was the kind of man whose presence turned heads without trying. The kind of man who carried quiet authority in every movement. James Carter didn't need to speak to be respected, he simply was. He had just wrapped up a long dinner meeting with senior officials in the mayor's office. The city's new community policing initiatives were the subject. His department had been working for months on reform plans, and the mayor wanted his input personally. It had gone well. He should have felt satisfied. But James never fully relaxed. Especially not while driving at night. Especially not when blue and red lights suddenly exploded in his rearview mirror. He blinked once, then sighed deeply. He slowed his car and pulled onto the shoulder, switching off the radio and putting both hands clearly on the wheel. A practiced routine. Not from guilt. From necessity. The police cruiser behind him idled for a moment before the driver's door opened. A white officer stepped out, broad-shouldered, late 40s, buzzcut, rigid posture. His uniform was perfectly pressed, but his expression was tight, suspicious. He approached with heavy, deliberate steps, hand near his holster, eyes locked on James like he was already a suspect. The officer didn't introduce himself. No, good evening. No explanation. Just a sharp, clipped command, license and registration. James nodded, voice calm. Certainly, officer. May I ask the reason for the stop? You were swerving. And this area's known for drug trafficking, the officer snapped, scanning the vehicle's interior as he spoke. I wasn't aware I had swerved, but thank you for letting me know. James reached slowly, carefully, opening his glove compartment. He handed over his documents without sudden movement. The officer barely glanced at them before tossing them under one arm. Step out of the vehicle. I'm sorry. James asked, still polite. You heard me. Step out. I need to check for signs of intoxication. James hesitated, then nodded and opened the door. He stepped out slowly, his tall frame unfolding from the car with practiced grace. Standing, he towered slightly over the officer, but his posture remained relaxed. He wasn't resisting, just observing. You been drinking tonight? The officer asked, circling him like a lion. No, officer. Any drugs in the car? No. Mind if I search it? I do mind. Without a warrant or probable cause, I don't consent to a search. The officer's jaw clenched. You think you're clever. I believe I know my rights. Turn around and put your hands on the hood. James sighed internally. It was going exactly as he feared. He turned, placing his palms gently on the cool surface of the BMW. The officer patted him down roughly, searching for something he wasn't going to find. As he did, another cruiser pulled up. A second officer, much younger and visibly nervous, stepped out. He glanced from James to the senior officer, unsure of what he'd walked into. Everything good, Sarge. Got a possible here, the older officer said. Suspicious attitude. Claims he's some kind of government guy. The younger officer walked over to the car, noting the federal tags on the license plate. He said nothing but took out his phone and began searching quietly. Meanwhile, the senior officer clicked the handcuffs onto James's wrists. You're detaining me? James asked, still level. Just a precaution. Until we sort this out. James didn't struggle. He didn't shout. He just looked him in the eye and said, You're making a serious mistake. That made the officer smirk. I doubt it. They brought him to the station, no sirens, no urgency. The older officer even whistled a tune as he walked James through the door, as if this was just another catch to process. The young officer followed, clearly uncomfortable. In the booking room, the desk sergeant looked up as they entered, his eyes narrowing when he saw James. What have we got? Possible impersonation. Said he works for the government. Seemed real confident about it. The desk sergeant looked at James's ID, then did a double take. He looked up again, slower this time, his face changing. You brought in James L. Carter. That's what the ID says, the older officer said. Jesus Christ, the sergeant whispered. Do you know who this is? The officer laughed. Some lawyer. City inspector. The sergeant didn't answer. He pulled up the internal database. His fingers moved slower now, careful. As the profile loaded, his face drained of color. James Carter. Director of Internal Affairs, Office of Police Accountability. Federal rank. Oversight clearance. Direct contact with state and national authorities. He wasn't just someone. He was the man who could shut departments down. The room went silent. Even the younger officer's eyes widened. James stood quietly, watching. Get those cuffs off him. Now, the sergeant ordered. The senior officer hesitated, then moved to unlock them. James rubbed his wrists as he stepped away, his voice still calm. I tried to give you a chance. I gave you every signal that I was not a threat. I answered your questions. I remained polite. I informed you I was a government official. I refused an unlawful search. At every moment, I acted within my rights. The officer tried to speak. Sir, I didn't mean. You meant exactly what you did, James interrupted. You saw a black man in a nice car in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time. That's all you needed. The sergeant stepped forward, nervous. Director Carter, I sincerely apologize. I'm not here for your apology, James said. But I will be back. Your precinct is now under review. I suggest you prepare your records. And your officers. He turned without another word and walked out of the building. No threats. No yelling. Just purpose. Behind him, the senior officer stood frozen. For the first time in his career, his authority had been reversed. And it shook him to his core. James sat in his car for a moment before driving off. He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling a breath he didn't know he was holding. It wasn't about revenge. It never was. But it was about accountability. About the system correcting itself. He turned the key and pulled onto the road, headlights cutting through the darkness ahead. But behind him, a different kind of storm was beginning. 3 days had passed since the incident, but the ripple it caused was far from fading. Inside the 4th District Precinct, the atmosphere had shifted from quiet confidence to raw anxiety. Doors that used to remain open were now shut. Conversations were hushed. Even the sound of boots on linoleum floors carried an edge of caution. Everyone knew what was coming, and everyone feared being next. The Internal Affairs audit had been officially announced that morning, and though the notice was professional, its implications struck like thunder. Dean Whitaker sat at his desk staring blankly at the computer monitor, though he hadn't clicked anything for nearly half an hour. His coffee had gone cold. His hands hadn't stopped shaking since sunrise. He'd spent 17 years on the force, built a reputation as a no-nonsense, tough but fair officer, or so he told himself. But now, even he couldn't deny the truth that was bubbling to the surface. He had treated James Carter like a criminal not because of behavior, but because of color. The realization wasn't just uncomfortable. It was paralyzing. He had tried, in the beginning, to justify his actions. He replayed it again and again in his head. The night was dark. The road was isolated. The car was high-end. And sure, maybe he'd been a little aggressive, but aggressive didn't mean racist, right? That's what he told his wife. That's what he told himself. But in his heart, he knew better. And now, there was no escape. Not from Carter. Not from the cameras. Not from the system Carter represented. Across town, in a sleek downtown federal building, James Carter stood in front of a whiteboard in a meeting room, surrounded by his audit team. The room was alive with tension and focus. Agents flipped through files, watched body cam footage, and cross-referenced disciplinary records. The culture of the 4th District Precinct was under a microscope now, and Carter wasn't just leading the charge, he was setting the tone. We're not here to ruin careers, he said firmly, his deep voice calm but firm. We're here to restore trust. But if restoring trust means removing those who undermine it, then we do that without hesitation. His team nodded, taking notes, reviewing names. What they were finding confirmed his suspicions. The 4th District had long operated like a closed circle, complaints that disappeared, patterns of abuse that went unpunished, senior officers turning a blind eye to misconduct. Dean Whitaker, it seemed, was far from an isolated case. By the following week, subpoenas had been issued for internal reports, and Carter began closed-door interviews with select officers, both current and former. The young officer who had responded as backup the night of James's arrest, Officer Ramirez, had been one of the first called in. He sat nervously across from Carter in a quiet interview room, clearly trying to mask his unease. Carter noticed the twitching fingers, the tightened jaw, but also the honesty in the young man's eyes. "You didn't participate in the arrest," Carter began. "No, sir," Ramirez replied. "I just followed Sergeant Whitaker to the scene. I stayed back mostly. But you witnessed the exchange." Ramirez nodded. "Yes, I saw everything." Carter folded his hands. "Did you feel it was justified?" Ramirez hesitated. "At first, I didn't question it. Sergeant Whitaker's been on the force a long time. He commands respect. But after watching how it played out, especially after learning who you were, I realized how wrong it was. It didn't matter who you were. He just made up his mind the moment he saw you." Carter raised an eyebrow. "Have you seen him do that before?" "Yes. Not always that extreme. But yeah, there've been times. Stops that didn't feel right. Comments in the locker room. Things you let slide because he's old school. Now I wonder if that's just another word for biased." Carter nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty." Ramirez sat straighter. "Sir, if I speak up, if I go on record, am I protected?" "You are," Carter said. "And more than that, you'll be doing the job the way it was meant to be done. That's how change starts." Meanwhile, the pressure on Dean Whitaker intensified. He had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His badge had been turned in, his service weapon temporarily revoked. News of the incident had leaked to local media, and though no names were mentioned, the story of the officer who mistakenly arrested a federal official made headlines. In every corner of the department, whispers followed. Him like shadows. Once a figure of authority, he was now a warning. He sat alone in his modest home office, staring at a blank Word document on his laptop. He had been asked to submit a written statement explaining his actions. But what was there to say? That he had judged a man because of the color of his skin. That his instincts were shaped not by training but by prejudice. Every draft he started turned into a confession. And he wasn't ready to confess. Not yet. James Carter, on the other hand, had no such hesitation. As he reviewed the growing pile of reports, he saw what he'd seen before in cities across the country: patterns. Not just racism, but indifference. Officers ignoring red flags because he's one of the good guys. Supervisors brushing complaints under the rug to protect the department's image. But an image built on denial was no image at all. It was a mask. And Carter was in the business of ripping masks off. His next step was a formal hearing, open to city officials and internal review board members. Dean Whitaker was ordered to attend. The room was stark: gray walls, long tables, microphones, and a wall-mounted screen showing documentation for reference. Whitaker entered in a plain suit, not his uniform. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of everything he once commanded now bore down on his shoulders. Carter entered a moment later, papers in hand, calm and professional. He nodded politely to the board, then sat across from Whitaker. "No anger. Just resolve. This hearing," began the chairwoman, "is to determine whether Sergeant Dean Whitaker violated civil rights statutes and department conduct codes during his interaction with Director James Carter on the evening of." "I did," Whitaker interrupted. The room went still. "I violated protocol. I made assumptions. I used my badge like a shield and a sword. I profiled a man who did nothing wrong. I embarrassed this department. And I failed the oath I took 17 years ago." The board members looked at each other in surprise. Carter, too, was silent, eyes narrowed slightly. This wasn't what he expected. Whitaker took a breath. I've had time to think. And I don't have excuses. I know how I looked at you that night. And I know I've looked at other people the same way. I thought I was doing my job. But I wasn't. I was using my fear and my bias as justification. And I'm ashamed of it. The chairwoman cleared her throat. Are you prepared to accept the consequences of this admission? I am. Carter spoke then. Sergeant Whitaker, your words matter. But words don't erase harm. I didn't need an apology. I needed accountability. The system needed a wake-up call. And maybe this is it. The board convened briefly in private. When they returned, the decision was swift. Termination from the force, with loss of pension eligibility due to breach of ethical conduct. Whitaker didn't protest. He stood, nodded once, and walked out. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. Not because he was free. But because the mask was finally off. Back in his office that evening, Carter received a handwritten letter. It was from Whitaker. Not pleading for leniency. Not asking for reconsideration. Just a simple message. Greater than, you exposed what I refused to see in myself. Thank you. I hope the next man in that uniform does better than I did. Carter folded the letter and placed it in his drawer. There were still officers to evaluate, still changes to implement. But in that moment, for the first time in a long time, he felt the system had taken one real step forward. And in a city where justice had too often been delayed, that step mattered. The news spread faster than anyone expected. Within 48 hours of the public hearing, the story had broken into national headlines. Sergeant fired after wrongfully arresting Internal Affairs Director. Traffic stop sparks federal police audit. The media didn't need much to run with, just one body cam clip, a name, and a symbol of the deep-rooted problem that people had been talking about for years. For once, the story wasn't buried. It was broadcast. James Carter watched it all unfold from his office high above the city, the skyline stretched like a painting behind him. He didn't enjoy attention. In truth, he hated being the story. His job was to enforce accountability, not become a symbol. But that wasn't how the world worked anymore. In this case, he knew he didn't have the luxury of silence. That morning, he was called to speak at a press conference hosted by the mayor's office. They wanted to address the audit, the upcoming changes, and the incident that had sparked it all. Carter knew it would be a circus. The mayor wanted to calm the public. The police union would be watching. Activists were already organizing protests. Everyone had their own version of the truth, their own agendas, their own stories. But Carter had only one goal: clarity. When he arrived at City Hall, the steps were lined with journalists, cameras, and signs. Some praised him. Some called him a hero. Others warned that he went too far. He walked past them all, face unreadable. He didn't respond to the shouts. He didn't break stride. Inside, he was ushered into the press chamber. The podium stood under bright lights. The room was already packed. The mayor gave the opening remarks, praising his professionalism, vowing reform, thanking his department for swift action. When Carter stepped up to the microphone, the room fell silent. He looked across the rows of faces: media, police, citizens, officials. He cleared his throat, then spoke. I didn't ask for this story to happen. I didn't seek the spotlight. I didn't stop being a citizen the night I was pulled over. But I was reminded that, sometimes, people forget that I am. People forget that behind every stop, every uniform, every accusation, there is a human being. The officer who detained me didn't know my name. He didn't need to. My skin was enough. The reporters scribbled notes. Flashbulbs popped. He continued. This is not just about me. It's not even just about him. It's about a pattern. A system that has, for far too long, allowed bias to dress up as procedure. Allowed aggression to masquerade as authority. It's time that we change not just how officers are punished, but how they are trained. It's time to remove not only those who do harm, but to support those who want to do better. He paused, letting the silence settle. I'm not here to take sides. I'm here to raise the bar. Then he stepped down, nodded to the mayor, and exited the room. Later that afternoon, the backlash began. The police union released a statement condemning Carter's actions as overreach and politically motivated. They argued that Sergeant Dean Whitaker had an unblemished career and had been unfairly made an example of. Carter received dozens of emails from officers, some supportive, some scathing. One warned, "Be careful who you burn. It'll come back." But that night, something unexpected happened. Carter was working late when he received a message from reception, a visitor. It was nearly 10 o'clock. He hesitated, then told them to send the person up. When the elevator doors opened, Dean Whitaker stepped out. He looked different. Not just because he wasn't in uniform, he looked tired, but also lighter, like a man who had finally stopped pretending. "Evening," Dean said softly. "Didn't expect to see you again," Carter replied. "I figured you wouldn't. But I needed to say something. Not in court. Not in front of cameras. Just here. Man to man." Carter gestured for him to sit. Dean lowered himself into the seat across from the desk. "I've been going through my own file," Dean said. "All the reports. All the complaints. Things I dismissed for years. I read them like I was reading about someone else. But it wasn't. It was me." Carter said nothing. He just listened. "I know what people are saying. That I got what I deserved. And maybe I did. But you need to know something. When I joined the force, I really believed I was doing good. I thought I could protect people. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing them as people. They became threats, profiles, risks." Carter leaned forward slightly. "And what changed now?" Dean looked up. "You did. That night, when I looked in your eyes and you weren't angry. You weren't scared. You were just disappointed. I realized I had become everything I used to hate. So I went back. I talked to some of the people I stopped. I apologized. Not all of them forgave me. But a few did. And it helped." Carter studied him for a long moment. "I can't give you your job back," he said. "Even if I wanted to. I don't want it back," Dean replied. "That version of me doesn't deserve the badge. But maybe I can do something else. Maybe I can help undo some of the damage. If you ever need someone to talk to rookies about what not to become, I'm around." Carter nodded once. "I'll keep that in mind." Dean stood. He offered his hand. Carter hesitated, then took it. A firm shake. Not of agreement, but of recognition. After he left, Carter sat back in his chair. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to feel a sense of closure. Not because Dean had changed, but because the possibility of change had proven itself real. Over the next few weeks, Carter's team rolled out a full transparency report. The 4th District began mandatory cultural competency training. A new hotline was created for citizens to report misconduct anonymously. Officers like Ramirez were promoted to internal liaison roles, bridging the gap between the street and the system. Small steps, but meaningful. In private, Carter still bore the weight. The long hours, the scrutiny, the letters from angry officers, the praise from activists, the politics, the pressure. But he endured, because he knew what was at stake. One evening, Carter stood at the back of a classroom at the police academy. A new class of recruits sat in rows, clean uniforms, white eyes. At the front, not lecturing, but sharing, was Dean Whitaker. He wasn't wearing a badge. Just a plain shirt, sleeves rolled up. He spoke honestly. About his mistakes. About the arrogance he once mistook for experience. About the night he met James Carter and realized he was part of the problem. Some recruits nodded. Some looked uncomfortable. But all of them listened. Carter slipped out quietly. He didn't need to stay. The work was being done. Outside, the city was alive with noise. Cars, lights, people. The same streets where it all began. But tonight, something felt different. Not perfect, but better. And for James Carter, that was worth everything.